So Samsung's Galaxy S23 and A54 are two of the latest and greatest smartphone offerings from Samsung, which both offer excellent user experiences at their price points. Now that I've had enough time to use and compare each of these in my everyday life, I want to take a few minutes to discuss with you some of the key differences and maybe even help you decide which of these phones is right for you. So sit back, subscribe, and let's get started. Starting with price. So for the newly released A54, we are already beginning to see discounted pricing as low as $400, but for the sake of simplicity in this video, we'll stick with its retail price of $450, which gets you 6 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage. And the S23's pricing largely depends on whether you are leaning towards the smaller standard S23 or its bigger brother S23 Plus, which will get the majority of screen time during this video thanks to its nearly identical appearance to the A54, but either of these flagships will leave your wallet twice as empty with pricing in the $800 to $1,000 range, which gets you 8 gigabytes of RAM and either 128 or 256 gigabytes of storage. Pricing constantly changes on these Samsung phones as a whole though, so I'll leave some links in the description for the most up-to-date prices. Now, at first glance, these two phones look strikingly similar, and funnily enough, they are nearly the same exact size and weight, with each of these coming in around 200 grams on my scale, despite having many physical differences, which we'll touch on in a minute. But despite these size similarities, we have a smaller 6.4-inch screen on the A54, and the S23 Plus is able to fit a 6.6-inch screen in the same amount of real estate, which gives it a very aesthetically appealing appearance while also being surprisingly everyday user-friendly, factoring its large screen size in a much more tolerable form factor compared to its bigger counterparts. But when we have a pricing difference as large as the one in this video, it needs to be said that the A54's 6.4-inch display, despite having a little extra bezel, has also been very enjoyable in my everyday use over the past few weeks, and in a lot of ways it felt like I was still using my S23 Plus given the similar form factors of the phones. And the standard S23's 6.2-inch screen size doesn't sound all too much smaller on paper, but in person it is considerably more compact than the A54 if size matters to you. It is also abundantly apparent now that the design matters a lot to consumers because Samsung has gone all in this year to design the A54 in a near copy and paste fashion to the flagship S23 phones, and completely leaving behind the older A series style we've been seeing for the past few years. The only noteworthy design difference here is the power and volume buttons being positioned a fair bit lower on the A54, which makes them far easier to press. But at this point you might be thinking to yourself that there must be far more going on with this S23 to warrant it costing twice as much, or perhaps there are some unforeseen sacrifices being made on the A54 in order to cut its price in half, so it's time to compare these pound for pound with their price points in mind. The biggest difference you will find and feel immediately are the choice of materials. The S23 has an ultra premium feeling to it with its aluminum sidings, whereas the A54's plastic frame leaves a lot to be desired. It's also worth mentioning that for the first time in recent memory, Samsung's A series phone now sports a glass backing, but it is certainly an inferior feeling glass compared to the flagship counterpart. Overall, I understand that selling points like these might not matter to the majority of you out there who will simply put a case on your phone anyways, so with that in mind, the material differences are a win-win scenario since you will either get your money's worth with a premium feeling S23 or save your hard-earned money with an adequately equipped A54. Now, of course, the decision here goes a little deeper than just design language alone, so let's jump into these phones with the biometrics and hash out the core differences. Both of these phones have more than capable fingerprint sensors and face recognition, which has worked consistently and reliably for me in my everyday use, but the S23 has the upper hand here with the ability to tap your thumb on the sensor, opposed to the A54 taking a split second longer to register, and it also takes an extra split second of staring at your screen to get in with your face, while the S23 seamlessly unlocks every time I use it, which is quite nice if you tend to be impatient with your technology like myself. But if you have even a little bit of patience and don't need the most powerful phone on the market, then it will be easy to forgive the shortcomings of the A54 when it comes to performance. Of course, we have two different processors in these two phones, and the simple yet conclusive observation I've made over the past few weeks is that some stuttering and random pauses in navigating the phone can be common on the A54, whereas the S23 flies through essentially everything I throw at it. But with a couple minor performance discrepancies aside, both of these phones have performed exceptionally well in my average everyday use. Everything I do on my S23 can also be done on my A54, with the exception of slightly lowering the graphics on some of my games like Super Mario Strikers on Dolphin Emulator needing to be changed Midrange to 720p resolution to get a smooth 60 frames per second, which is important in a fast-paced game like this, whereas the S23 eats this game up at 1080p resolution, no problem. Another little quirk I noticed is that despite both of these screens having a smooth 120Hz refresh rate, the A54 feels a little less fluid when scrolling through news feeds and social media. But looking beyond the close side-by-side comparisons and using these phones exclusively in my everyday life, the A54 on the whole feels like my S23 Plus in a lot of ways. I didn't really find myself missing the extra 0.2 inches in screen real estate, as watching YouTube videos and other content has been very enjoyable. The small bits of lag here and there have been more than acceptable for the price point, and the fact that I can still play a ton of my games on this phone is a huge plus given the screen size and battery capacity, which we'll talk about battery life in a minute. And overall, we have a ton of the features here that make Samsung smartphones as a whole so enjoyable to use, such as the 25-watt super fast charging, which really isn't too far behind the 45-watt charging speed of the S23 Plus when going from 0 to 100%, an IP67 water and dust resistance rating for excellent peace of mind, a comparable dual speaker setup, and aside from the lack of wireless charging in Samsung DeX, we have nearly all of what Samsung's One UI 5.1 has to offer, with features like Samsung's AirDrop equivalent Quick Share and Smart View to cast your phone to your TV. And while this may make the S23 and S23 Plus look like head scratchers from a value perspective, it's worth noting that there really hasn't been much that I can fault these flagship phones for, as these S-series phones have been getting further and further refined over the generations, with the S23 in particular making what I believe to be a monumental leap forward with their new power-efficient processor, which has drastically improved battery life. The A54 does a pretty good job of holding its own in the battery department though, thanks to its large capacity of 5,000 milliamp hours, getting me no less than 6 hours of screen time in a single charge and around 7 hours of screen time in my average everyday use. But the battery efficiency of these new S23s is seriously no joke, with my S23 Plus being able to net me around 8 to 9 hours of screen time despite having a smaller battery, which makes this one of the key differences for exceptional everyday use. When it comes to everyday use of the cameras between the S23 and A54, we can once again see what your extra money is going towards on the S23, with excellent image stabilization, like in this video of walking with my phone in my hand looking very smooth and stable, unlike the A54 in the same setting and scenario wobbling around much more. And the S23's versatility is unmatched in the zoom department, since it sports a 3x optical zoom lens, allowing you to zoom up to 30 times on subjects, whereas the maximum 10x digital zoom on the A54 really struggles to keep up with the S23 in terms of capturing details from far away. But on the flip side of technical YouTube camera comparisons, if you are simply looking for a good point-and-shoot camera for average everyday photos of your surroundings and pets, the A54 gives great results with its 50 megapixel primary lens, in addition to the ultra-wide lens for nice-looking landscape shots, and a macro lens for taking very close-up shots, which is actually missing on the S23 to my surprise, with this example showing the closest I could get to the subject compared to the A54. All things considered though, from a real-life user perspective, the fact of the matter is that at the time of making this video, the A54 is a more than well-equipped mid-range smartphone from Samsung, which warrants every bit of its $400 or so price tag, whereas the S23, while also delivering on all of its promises, is understandably a harder pill to swallow at twice the price. The A54 looks, feels, and performs surprisingly similar to the S23 Plus in my average use, and for this reason it takes the win for me in this matchup. The A54 feels like a phone that I am able to get all of the value out of which I paid for, whereas the S23 and S23 Plus, while being some of the best conventionally sized smartphones I've used to date, should only be considered once their prices have come down enough to feel like a jump up from the A54 is more worthwhile. What are your thoughts though on these two smartphones, and where do your preferences lie, and for what reasons? I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to the Symonds YouTube channel today for more comparisons and reviews. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.